So back to working at the new shop. Next I needed to turn my attention outside the shop and deal with this giant tree that fell out behind the shop a few months ago. This tree just barely grazed the side of the building, and thankfully it didn't do any damage, but I obviously needed to get the tree cleared now that it was down. I also wanted to take down this big walnut that was leaning ominously towards the shop, which I'll talk about later in the video. To clear the downed tree, I rented a wood chipper and mini excavator since I'd be working alone. And thankfully I was working with Sunbelt Rentals on some other social media content, so I was able to use these machines free of charge. That said, even had I had to pay for the rental, it would have still been much cheaper than the $2,300 quote I received from a local arborist to clear this tree. After the machines were delivered, I got the wood chipper started up, which was simple enough, and then loaded my first test limb into the machine. And the chipper chewed it up with ease, and the only thing slowing it down was the dozens of poison ivy vines hanging from the tree. The limb did pull itself free from the vine, and I just continued loading in the smaller limbs to get them out of the way. Soon enough, I was to my first larger section of branch, and this was where the mini excavator came in. Instead of having to cut these limbs into small sections and kill my back loading them in by hand, I could use the excavator to help load the branches into the chipper. This chipper had a 10-inch capacity and tore through most of this material with ease. And the machine also had an auto feed functionality that slowed down the feed rate if the cutter head got bogged down, which kept it from stalling. From there, I continued working on breaking down the fallen tree using my electric chainsaws to trim the limbs and cut the larger trunk sections into more manageable chunks. I also decided to get rid of this little poplar while I was at it, since it was also covered in poison ivy vines, and I basically just pushed it over with the excavator and then cut the trunk free with my chainsaw. From there, it was really just more of the same, getting rid of the brush and then processing the trunk sections through the chipper. Once the fallen tree was out of the way, I could turn my attention to that leaning walnut, and this thing really needed to go. Not only was it majorly leaning towards the shop, it also dropped hundreds of black walnuts on my roof each spring. And I'm going to be putting in a big solar system on the roof here, and the last thing I wanted was a black walnut breaking one of my solar panels, so this tree had to go. I didn't get a ton of close-ups of me making the cuts on the tree since I didn't want my camera getting taken out if things went sideways. But basically, I cut a notch on the face of the tree in the direction I wanted the tree to fall, which was obviously away from the shop. After cutting my notch, I made what's called a back cut, which is a relief cut which eventually allows the tree to fold over onto that notch and fall. As I cut the back cut, I put in wedges to help push the tree away from the shop and also keep the kerf from closing on my bar. I slowly advanced my back cut, making sure not to cut all the way through to the notch, leaving what's called the hinge intact. I also parked the excavator between the tree and the shop to provide a little additional leverage on the tree, and with the combination of the wedges and the excavator, I eventually pushed the tree over, and thankfully it fell exactly where I had planned. Alright, I'm pretty excited because that tree fell exactly how I wanted it to. I watched a whole bunch of videos on YouTube. I watched the British Columbia Lumber Fallers training series on how to properly cut a notch and leave this bit of wood here that they call the hinge, and that's what allowed me to have this thing fall in a controlled manner exactly where I wanted it to. It was definitely nice to have the excavator as a little bit of backup, just putting some pressure on the backside, and I was actually able to push the tree over finally because it had such a lean to it with the excavator. I could have done it with like a rope and a come along, but the excavator is great because I didn't have a lot of stuff to tie off to. So now I can get this thing chopped up, and man, I have so much more room out here. No more giant black walnuts falling on my attic roof. Super loud every time they fall. Makes me think somebody's breaking into the attic here. So let's go ahead and get cleaned up. From there, all that was left to do was clear out the newly felled tree, which was pretty straightforward. And I know some of you will ask, unfortunately this walnut really wasn't big enough to do a whole lot of woodworking with. I might be able to get a few bowl blanks out of it, but definitely nothing I'd want to turn into actual lumber. While I'm working, let's take a second to talk about the sponsor of this week's video, Anker, and their Anker Solix F1200 portable power station. I've been using my Solix F1200 for about a year now, and it is an amazing resource to have on hand. I recently had a power outage at my shop right in the middle of wrapping up an edit, and thankfully I had my computer, monitor, and external hard drive all plugged into my Solix F1200. I never lost power and had plenty of battery capacity to wrap up the edit and transfer files. The Anker Solix F1200 uses premium lithium iron phosphate batteries, which can be fully depleted and recharged over 3,000 times with the batteries still in a healthy state. And this is great as it means I can use my power station for years to come worry-free. Also, Anker's Solix power stations are backed by a 5-year warranty for peace of mind. The Solix F1200 has a capacity of 1,229 watt-hours and a 1,500 watt output power, meaning it can power small appliances like mini fridges, coffee makers, microwaves, and more. And this makes the Solix F1200 great for car camping, RVing, portable job site power, or keeping things charged when the power goes out. The Solix F1200 can be recharged from 0% to 80% in just an hour, so it'll be ready for your next adventure in no time. The Solix F1200 features 13 ports in total, so you'll be able to power almost any device with the Solix F1200. You can get 50% off your own Anker Solix F1200 from July 10th through the 12th during Amazon Prime Day, so don't miss this once-a-year opportunity to get an incredible deal. Click the link in the video description below to learn more. With that done, the tree work was a wrap, and it's kind of crazy to look at the before and after shots, and I'm really excited to have a little bit more room back here, but unfortunately my property ends about 15 feet from the back of the shop, so I don't really have a ton of room to do much besides park back here. Next up on the outside to-do list was dealing with the massive amount of water coming off of the front porch roof, which was a previous project in this series. As you might remember, I didn't install gutters on the front porch, but after the first major rainstorm, it was pretty obvious that I needed them since I didn't want the footings and posts sitting in small ponds every time it rained. Also on that note, I just wanted to mention that all of that grading work I did earlier in the series totally solved the water coming into the shop, and that swale is doing its job funneling the water down to the street. The first step in installing the gutters was to have a length of continuous gutters made up, and I once again used DIY Guy's Gutter Supply here in Asheville. They were able to run one continuous 54-foot long piece of gutter material in the profile I wanted, and then I could install the gutters myself. I covered this whole process in detail as part of the Not So Tiny House series, so go watch that video if you want all the nitty-gritty, but I'll go over the high points here again. After the gutters were bent, I needed to cut a hole for the downspout adapter, which I did with a hole saw and a pair of aviation snips. To install the adapter, I first added a bead of Lexel and then screwed the adapter in place with the included metal screws. Next, I repeated a similar process to install the end cap, installing the cap with self-tapping screws, and then adding a fat bead of Lexel to seal the connection. I repeated the process at the other end, and then I could install the gutter hangers every 2 feet along the length of the gutters. And these hangers hook under the rolled edge on the front of the gutters and then snap onto the back edge. Once all the hangers were added, I could get the gutters hung with the help of my dad and this awesome off-road scissor lift. And obviously I didn't absolutely need this scissor lift for this, but man did it make installation a lot quicker than working off of ladders. So I started by marking the center point on the porch and then figured out the height that I wanted the gutters, factoring in the drop required for the gutters to flow towards the 2 downspouts at either end. With that figured out, we could lift the gutter into place using the scissor lift to assist, and then I could add the first screw to the center of the gutter to set the center height. Next, I fastened each end in place, factoring in a drop of 1/2 inch per 10 feet, which made the ends about 1.5 inches lower than the center. From there, I added screws between the center and end, with my dad helping me eyeball the slope just to make sure things stayed on track. I repeated the process on the other half, and with that, the gutters themselves were hung. And we had another pretty major rain between installing the gutters and the downspouts, and it was pretty clear the gutters were doing their job, diverting all of the water to each end of the gutters. And there was no standing water in any of the footings except at the 2 ends, which was the goal. Next, I went ahead and cut the trenches for the PVC, which I'll be using to move the water from the downspouts to the street, since I had a trencher rented. I started trenching at the street, where I'll be installing a pop-up emitter, and cut a trench in a straight line towards the right corner of the shop. Of course, this was also exactly where a previous gutter drainage system had been installed, but instead of PVC, they had used corrugated pipe. And obviously this system must have gotten irreparably clogged at some point because it was no longer in service, and this is why I'll be going with PVC for my system, since it's a lot easier to clean out. Once I got my trench closer to the shop, I started another trench at the corner of the building where I'll be catching the water from the existing above-ground corrugated drainage system. And I might replace this corrugated pipe at some point, but with the current kind of ridiculous prices of PVC, I figured that can wait. I connected the 2 trenches and then finished by digging another trench to connect the porch downspout so I can tie both of these systems together. Once that was done, I repeated the process for the downspout at the left corner of the building, and that wrapped up the trenching work. Also, we had yet another rainstorm, and it seemed like the trench was doing its job already, catching the water and sending it to the street. Next, I got the downspouts installed, which was super simple. I just cut the vertical pieces to length with my miter saw, cut another piece to connect the two elbows, attached everything with screws, and finally attached the whole assembly to the porch posts with brackets. Alright guys, I haven't installed the PVC yet, so I'm going to wrap up this video here. In the next video, I've got some more shop renovation work, fixing the huge mess caused by a frozen water heater in the attic, which ended up flooding the entire kitchen and office area. If it's your first time here, go ahead and get subscribed and ring that notification bell so you don't miss my future videos. And last, if you want to support me, I sell merch, I have plans available for a lot of my woodworking projects, and I have both Patreon and YouTube members set up, so check one of those out. Alright, thanks for watching y'all, and until next week, happy building.